Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Online Learning with Miss Giddings. So the last few lessons we've looked at the abolition of the bloody code and transportation. So this lesson we're going to look at something a little bit different. If you've already started your worksheets then you already know what it's about, but for those that haven't, we're going to look at why there was a revolution in prisons. So in this lesson we're going to be able to describe the main features of prison life in the 1800s and explain how prisons were used and why a revolution took place. Now, key word that's going to be used throughout this lesson and throughout your work is reform. This means making changes in order to improve something. So changes made in order to improve prisons in the 1800s. Now, in 1777, the following rules were being demanded to be introduced into prisons. These were running water provided, clean hygienic conditions. Each prison had to have a doctor, prisoners would be given the same food, prisoners would get regular visits from people outside of the church, prisoners should also work hard, and prisoners should spend time in silence and alone so that they would change their attitude to crime. All these rules were being demanded, and actually they're all brought in during the 1800s, but there were debates on two separate issues that we're going to look in a lot more detail at. If you've already looked through your worksheet, you will know that there is a worksheet on these bullet points which I've provided, whether you need to tell me something good and something bad about the introduction of them. Now, the two separate issues, let's have a look at those. Now, number one, if it's going to be separate, if the prison should be separate, or if it should be silent. So these are two different things. Separate means individual cells where the prisoners worked, prayed, and had religious teachings. They only left these cells for religious services and for exercise. In fact, over 50 prisons by the 1850s used this system. However, they were hugely expensive as prisons had to be rebuilt in order to make this work. So, some critics said that the separate system was too harsh. There was no evidence that it reformed prisoners, and there were high insanity rates because prisoners were driven to despair by their loneliness. Basically, they're in solitary confinement all the time, except for exercise and for religious services. So let's have a look to see what the silent one is. This is where prisoners worked together, but they were in silence. This was a lot cheaper because expensive building was not needed, so they could still use the original buildings. However, it required very great discipline to be effective. You had to make sure that all prisoners were silent at all times. So what I'd like you to do is choose which one you would rather have and why. There is a space on your worksheet for you to answer that. Let's have a look at the other issue that was presented. Useful work or pointless work? So reformers believed that this was better for prisoners for useful work because it made them more likely to work after they had been released. This included making boots, mats, prison clothes, sewing mailbags and coal sacks. So they were producing things that could be used. However, critics thought that pointless work was better because prisoners hated it and they were less likely to commit crimes that would put them back in prison. If they were given useful work, they would want to stay in prison. So pointless work included oakum picking, which is when they pulled apart a rope, the tread wheel, so that was when they were walking nowhere. They had to just make the wheel turn, but also they had the crank, which was in their rooms. They had to turn this 20 times a minute, 10,000 times a day. So again, you need to choose which one you would rather and tell me why. So those are the two issues: separate or silent, or useful work, or pointless work. Now that's what it was like before. Let's have a look to see what the situation was like after 1850. So from the 1850s, the crime rate was actually falling. So the lenient system was suited to this rate. So them being nice, so that's useful work. However, Actually, as the crime rate was falling, prisons got harsher. Some critics said that they were not actually reforming criminals, but sending them back onto the streets to commit more crimes. So, reaction against the reform, these changes that were brought in. They brought in more hard labour. So they got rid of the lenient system of useful work and really put in a lot more hard labour. They were given a minimum of 5 years for a second offence. If you'd already been in prison once for maybe a petty theft, if you did that again, you were given a minimum of 5 years. Harsher punishments were introduced. You had whipping, electric shocks, bread and water diets, that's all you were given, and then the solitary confinement, bringing back that separatist system. Now, as we always do, what I'd like you to do is click onto your handouts page and complete the work set. You have loads of different activities there, which you'll definitely be able to do. And as always, any issues, please email me. So that was a nice quick introduction to the prison system. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.